Okay, excellent. Excellencies, flags, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, panelists, I'd like to thank the organizers, the very good friends at the National Maritime Foundations, for having me back here in Delhi. It's a terrific pleasure to be here and share some thoughts with you. I'm a military historian by trade, so forgive me, but one of the things, and I spend a lot of time teaching in class, so I have to say I want to commend the National Maritime Foundation for the incredible number of young people that I can see in the room. That's a wonderful thing, because we're talking about today, we're talking about the present, but you sitting there, you are the ones that are going to make the solutions and the ideas that we talk about today, the reality of tomorrow. Without you, all of this is going to be extremely diminished in its value. So thank you for doing that. I want to start with an obscure story, and if you bear with me, by the end of it, its meaning and its significance will make sense to you as well. On a rather sunny and hot February day in 1804, a small ketch of dubious build was about to enter the harbor in Tripoli. As the ketch get closer to the harbor, it was very visible a very significant substantive warship in the harbor. That warship was the USS Philadelphia, which had been captured by Barbary pirates just a few months earlier. That ketch that was so unassuming was hiding, in reality, a small group of sailors from the US Navy who, during the night, boarded the ship and blew it to pieces. Their strategic objective was for that ship not to fall into Barbary hands. Now, the key element of that story, though, is that the one person that enabled that operation to be successfully conducted was a person unknown to history. A local Sicilian pilot by the name of Salvatore Patalano, that nobody ever heard before or since, was the person that had managed to sail the ship across the Mediterranean throughout a very difficult storm, get it closer to Tripoli, speak to the locals, and then engage by avoiding reefs and shores to get as close as possible to the Philadelphia. He knew the place like it was his own home. In the contested global order of the early 1800s, a period during which control over the means to project power was one of the key manifestations on how you exercise your contribution, your shaping, your role, your position in that global order, a very remarkable thing happened on that occasion. A local was essential to deliver a global impact. Catalano's experience as a sea captain, his ability to speak the language, to have traveled across the Mediterranean, that central part of the Mediterranean, his ability and its knowledge of tides, currents, links across different seafaring communities had made all the difference. In that contested global order of the day, the empowerment of the individual stakeholders, no matter how small they are, contributed to make the difference on that day. On that day, he was history in that global space, contested as it was. And there is an important lesson to take away from there, which I think is very applicable to the type of contested global order that we're talking about, and in particular the type of solutions. My theme for today is about cooperation between India and the UK in terms of advancing what is this resource geopolitics contested global order at sea. That resource geopolitics element is very interesting because it introduces us a particular element of how we should understand today the global order at sea. Global order at sea, on one hand, it still is about having the means and controlling the means to project power across the oceans. But it is also, as Christian was talking about earlier, about the ability to have the means to control the space itself. The ocean is no longer a place where you go from point A to point B with occasional seafaring activities around it. When it comes to the ability to project state-controlled power, the sea itself is becoming the object of that contestation. Fish, data, resources of different kinds, connectivity itself, these can all be weaponized. And I think the video that we watched this morning elegantly put that notion together. But as a result of that, what we also understand is that governance, and in particular our understanding of governance as a result of the establishment of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and how it creates across the states the world over, not just coastal states, but anyone that uses the sea, an awareness about the rights and duties that states and communities the world over have in order to responsibly and sustainably use the ocean. So as we proceed in our conversation today, we have to acknowledge that the global order at sea today is the convergence of a history in which that structural level of international relations, use of power that states project at sea to expand their control through these means over others has widened out and now involves and includes also that contestation over the control of the space and the resources and the elements in it themselves. Governance, therefore, it's a difficult task because in the old global order at sea, what you could certainly do, you could establish hierarchies of naval power, and the naval treaties of the 1930s made that very clear. And the sort of struggles across the world among them, occasionally supported by enlisted local allies, was about it. Today, however, I think that we are about to see a significant change, a change in which the local has an incredible capacity for agency in that governance piece. How the global order at sea changes does not depend on major powers alone, because those rights and duties to responsibly and sustainably access and develop and use the resources of the oceans and the ocean itself rests among the communities that face particular portions of the oceans. The Salvatore Catalanos of today that operates in their governance space, the locals that have the knowledge, that have the experience, that have the expertise and professional know-how of a particular portion of the ocean have an increasingly greater importance. In fact, I would say they are more important than ever. That local that goes back to the global and shapes it has never had the meaning and the potential that it has today. Now, why does this matter? Because if we agree that the global order is likely to remain contested because the structural element and the governance piece sit next to each other, and it's impossible to talk about one without acknowledging the other, I do think that's where the space for cooperation emerges. When we're talking about the UK and India in particular, I think it is fair to say that the fundamental shared understanding of the importance of maritime security in this maritime century, a century in which our dependency on the ocean for our survival, from an economic point of view, from a human being's point of view, has never been as important as it is, for the very good reasons that the Christians mentioned earlier on. It's been one of the fundamental reasons why, within a panoply of initiatives between the UK and India, maritime security has been certainly one of those in the driving seat. If we think about the Indo-Pacific Ocean initiatives that has been promoted by Prime Minister Modi, the UK volunteered to co-lead together with India the maritime security pillar of it. And I think within this context, part of that shared understanding of the importance of maritime security to the global order at sea rests upon the fact that both India and the UK do share that fundamental meaning that empowering the stakeholders that are responsible for the management of the oceans at the local level is how you build that consensually agreed rule-based order. I really like this idea of consensually agreed because that really captures very much. This isn't about a global order that comes down on top of those who then have to implement it. This is about awakening awareness, empowering people with their own voice, providing them the grammar and the vocabulary so that they can articulate that voice. That's what maritime security cooperation has to do. And that's my last point for my remarks today. I want to focus on one particular option, one potential form of cooperation. From my perspective, and for the reasons that both my preceding speakers have outlined earlier, there is a considerable number of different initiatives in this part of the world, whether we want to limit it just to the Indian Ocean or we want to sort of expand it to the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. And that's a really good thing. I think it's a great thing. What we need next, therefore, I don't think it's any more sort of initiatives, global of sorts or regional. What we need is a way to harness the incredible energy and vibrancy that comes from all these initiatives and translate into, if you want, a box that creates the opportunity for that grammar to become a lively thing, for that voice to be articulated. The sum of the total is not just the different parts of it, it's what we make of those parts. And we translate into a transferable experience that enables others to take it a step further. And so what I want to talk about for the last couple of minutes of my talk is the idea of a center of excellence for maritime security in the Indian Ocean region to begin with. You saw it coming. Because I think that's a really important type of initiative. We have different initiatives that allow maritime domain awareness, standards in terms of conduct at sea. We also know all the basic rules. But how do we translate the experience of those who operate on a daily basis, and then we pass it on to others so that they can develop the means to discuss together what maritime security means. Let's make it possible to have that maritime security recipe book from which within that context we'll let the regional recipe, the menu of the day that everybody signs up to by sheer matter of practice. In that sense, therefore, a center of excellence, from my perspective, or a vision for an initiative of that kind, should be a center that does both training and education, as well as research. It research and harness the data from the experience of daily basis and then translate into a perception that can be shared with everybody in the region. So that everybody can sort of like take their own analysis and reflection of what is happening and then come together and talk about it. And propel initiatives like this one at an even faster pace, because everybody will have a common knowledge base. It also, I think, needs to be inclusive. This is about, or my task was to talk about UK-India cooperation. But this is not a UK-India only or alone type of initiative. It is about the UK and India, two important international stakeholders in the global maritime order, having a shared understanding of how crucial it is to empower everybody else with the capacity to make their contribution and do it together. So an inclusive space for me, in that sense, from an intellectual perspective, in terms of what you teach in this kind of center of excellence, as well as how you standardize the practice of what you're teaching, it's absolutely essential. Because unless it is felt as a common ownership, it'll never fly. And the third thing that, from my perspective, it needs to try to do is to bring together the growing and ever-expanding number of stakeholders in the maritime ecosystem, if you want. It has to talk to navies, coast guards. It has to talk actually to different parts and departments of governments from across different governments. It needs to bring together regional institutions, whether it is fusion centers or indeed other initiatives or representatives of organizations like Cromaro too. It needs to bring together industry and elements of the private sector who are going to be increasingly more important. It has to have lawyers, tech gurus. It needs to become a place where all the stakeholders that have a perception of the importance of the maritime domain to our societies can come together and share their experience on one hand and help shaping the rule books, if you want, of how we practice the conduct of maritime security in the areas that we already know. But as Christian mentioned earlier, there are others that now are emerging, and we don't necessarily know how they're going to interact with maritime security. Space, we might have to intervene in it in order to make it more sort of synergically connected to maritime security, or maybe not. We just do not have at the moment all the answers. But we need to have a lighthouse that is going to beam out, right, that sense of direction of travel, where the safe shores of maritime security are. That, to me, is the only way in which, in the global order of today, a global order in which that structural contestation that led in 1804 to the blowing up of USS Philadelphia links to a global order of today in which that dimension still exists, but at the same time has to coexist hand in hand with a much greater responsibility of ensuring the governance that will allow us to continue to sustainably develop, enjoy, and make the most of that link between human beings and the ocean. In that space, the first step in a place as important as the Indian Ocean and as diverse as the Indian Ocean is a center of excellence in which bringing that wealth of information together and enable research that access to data from practice, as well as the development of doctrines, manuals, the sort of things that will make and translate a general grammar into the practical ways in which it is implemented, not just a local affair, but a local resource of expertise, experience, and knowledge that becomes the fabric that connects the broader region. And if that is successful, and if that is an inclusive environment, then the next step, you'll have others who want to join. And there's no reason why there shouldn't be, as it is in Europe for completely different reasons, a network of centers of excellence that from Western Indian Ocean to the South Pacific define the broader intellectual lighthouses that are bringing maritime security to life, closing the gap between the local and the global, and enabling, like Salvatore Patalano did back in 1804, the local to become the history that defines the global. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.